Hello, welcome to another edition of Storytime. Um, Today's book is fantastic. Um, I can't wait to tell you this story, so let's get right to it. That's not the one I wanted to. As you can see there, I'm in the midst of paying a parking ticket that I forgot to pay, or I forgot to move my car the other night. So I got a parking ticket. But let's get to Invisible Man. There we go. So I don't know if maybe when you saw this title, if you were, I don't know, if you thought this was like the horror, kind of horror-ish type story of the Invisible Man, of a guy dressed up in bandages or whatever. It's not that at all. It's much, much better. You can see it was written by Ralph Ellison, and he lived a nice long life. Here he is right here. He only published this one book in his lifetime. But for this book, he won the National Book Award in 1953. And this book is considered one of the 100 best novels of the 20th century. So it's not like he disappeared or he wrote one book and then he was a hermit. That's not anything. He wrote a lot of essays, which included. He wrote essays and articles on people like William Faulkner, who, if you chose to read the book As I Lay Dying, you might learn a little bit about William Faulkner, and certainly jazz music as well. Ellison was, and that's mixed into this novel. He became a teacher as well, taught at the college level, won many awards for his writing. But this was his only novel. There was one other novel, called Juneteenth. Well, let's see. It was unfinished, and it was published in 2010 under the name 3 Days Before the Shooting. And it's a very long book because there wasn't any time to edit it at all. But it's an amazing book. There are some sentences in that book that I don't know if you ever had this when you're reading a book where you just kind of when you read the sentence, you had to close the book because like it just blew your mind so much. And there are a few of those moments in all his books, but certainly in 3 Days Before the Shooting as well. But let's not talk about 3 Days Before the Shooting. Let's talk about Invisible Man. Certainly in all of his books, he talks about social justice. He talks about race. And so those are issues that you need to think about as we're reading this book. But it's funny, much like James Baldwin, who has a book on the list called Giovanni's Room, which really isn't about race, but when they write about race and social justice, it's more of it more just kind of lays out the situation in a factual way, it seems, and it doesn't feel confrontational. It doesn't feel like you're wrong, I'm right, blah, blah, blah. It's more like, hey, here's the situation. What are we going to do about it? So that makes it much more approachable for a lot of people. So a lot of symbolism in his books and a lot of symbolism in this book. And I'm not sure I caught it all. And I'm sure as you see this book, there's going to be a lot of that. And so I want you to maybe to focus on that when we talk about aesthetics, about the use of symbolism and how powerful that can be. Okay, so the book Invisible Man is told in first person. It's like, this is my story, but we never know the person's name. All we know is that he is African American and that he's socially invisible. And this is the term Invisible Man. Like, nobody really sees him, which is very powerful. I think this concept of invisibility, of your true self. And that's kind of what he gets to here. The book is told from the present looking back. He's telling us this story. And so this is, whenever you're reading a novel, it's important to know like how the book is being told, how the story is being told. If it's being told like while it's happening, then that tells us something about the lack of reflection that has taken place while telling the story. It's more like, oh, here's what happened. But this book is told from the present looking back. And so there's some hindsight, there's some reflection about what has happened that the narrator can bring to the story. That kind of adds a lot to the whole meaning of the story. Somewhere in the beginning, maybe this is the first sentence, I'm not sure. Right here in the first part of the book, though, he says this: I live rent-free in a building rented strictly to whites, in a section of the basement that was shut off and forgotten during the 19th century. My hole is warm and full of light. Yes, full of light. I doubt if there's a brighter spot in all of New York in this hole of mine, and I do not exclude Broadway. Light is required, he says, because the truth is the light, and the light is the truth. And we'll see what happens to him in detail, how he gets in this hole. But there's an artist's rendition of what this hole looks like in New York City, and this is what is. When you read the book, this is kind of what the vision that you have of what his home might look like. And so with that, let's get to the story. So we know the Invisible Man lives in a small southern town. He's a young man, just graduated from high school. He's a model student, great student, smart. He's the valedictorian of his class. And as being the valedictorian, he has to give a graduation speech. And so instead of, and maybe you've seen some graduation speeches which are like in your face and they're trying to say something important, the Invisible Man's graduation speech says basically that for the black man to progress, he needs to be humble. He needs to have humility. He doesn't really believe this, the Invisible Man, but he says it because he thinks this is what the people want him to hear, want to hear. And he doesn't want to really, he wants to stay invisible, right? He doesn't want to expose who he truly is. And this has a lot of historical connections, right? Of how should civil rights work? Should it be like in your face? And this is all before Dr. King and all that. So should it be like in your face, like Brother Minister Malcolm X was all about, by any means necessary, and Dr. King is about nonviolence. Even back in the day, there's W.E.B. Du Bois. So there's always been this debate about how should civil rights occur. And so the Invisible Man is talking about how it should, basically occur gradually, don't cause any struggles, and just be nice. There's some white men in the audience who hear this, and they invite him to come and give the same speech to this important group of important rich white men in the community. When he gets there, it's like, I'm not going to say, like, there's all these service clubs. I'm not going to say any names because none of them are like this, but there's all these service clubs, right, in Battle Creek and everywhere else, of people who mean to do well. And so the Invisible Man gets to this speech, and he's, he dressed nice and all that, and he realizes that there's all these other young African-American males as well. And for the entertainment for the rich white men, they have what's called the Battle Royale. And this is like, this scene is mind-blowing in and of itself. And what it is all these African-American youth are put into the center, and they have to fight each other blindfolded. And the white men get a thrill out of this. So I'm not sure, like, if you, obviously there's full of symbolism here, right? And I'm not sure I've figured it all out, but certainly there is this idea that the haves, the white haves, put a little bit of something out there for African Americans to get, and they watch them fight over them. And this is what happens here at the Battle Royale. Clearly, in this scene, there's a implication of who is superior and who's inferior as well. So after giving the speech, the organization gives the Invisible Man a briefcase, and they say inside is a college scholarship for a Black college. So again, it's almost like just like a token, like here's we're going to do something good for you and feel good about ourselves, and here's a scholarship to go to a Black college. Don't go to a white college, but go to a Black college. So that's important. So he goes to college. He's doing well. The Invisible Man, and during the junior year, the dean of the college calls him in and says, "Would you give this trustee of the university, and the trustee is like like a board of directors that runs the college, would you give this trustee a tour of the college?" And of course, the trustee is a rich white man, Mr. Norton. And so that's symbolic as well. The Invisible Man says he accidentally drives Mr. Norton to Jim Trueblood's house. And Trueblood is an African-American who has impregnated his daughter, who, because of this act, has been rejected by the Black community in which he lives, but has been embraced by the white community. And so this is like an acceptance in the white community of some stereotypes amongst the African-American community, as if like this is the best they can be, while the Black community has higher standards for their own people. And so the Invisible Man accidentally is trying to explain this about the impact of the stereotypes that they might have. Mr. Trueblood, or Mr. Norton, gives some money again, almost like this charity, like, "Oh, you must need my money." But then he faints and he says he needs some alcohol. And so they take him, the Invisible Man takes him to a bar called the Golden Day Tavern. And certainly the name, I haven't quite figured this out, the name of the Golden Day Tavern must have some significance as well. Inside the Golden Day, our group is a group of Black veterans suffering from like PTSD or something. And again, just the idea that there's a group of African-American veterans who risked their lives and are still suffering for what they did for the country, and yet the country is not protecting their own rights, is an interesting commentary as well. But people begin fighting. The veterans fight amongst each other. And again, violence is a theme as well throughout the book. Mr. Norton's not doing very well. One of the veterans claims that he's a doctor. He says he'll look after Mr. Norton, which again is kind of breaking the stereotypes that are in play at the time. The Invisible Man finally gets Mr. Norton back to campus, and Mr. Norton is like, everything, I'm fine, everything's great, thank you very much. But Mr. Bledsoe, the college president, finds out about this whole experience, and he's furious. He calls the Invisible Man, he's going to call the Invisible Man in a little bit, so just hang on a second. So while the college president is hearing the story, there's a visit to the campus from a blind minister who's going to give like a speech. The blind minister's name is Homer Barbee, and certainly the name Homer must be, being blind kind of brings back to mind those ancient Greek sages who, tell wisdom and all of that. But he gives this great inspirational speech, and Invisible Man is so inspired by it and so motivated that he promises himself right there at the time to redevote himself to his studies and to improving the legacy of the college so that no one can ever question that there's different standards, whatever. And so when the speech is done, the president calls in the Invisible Man, and he's like, "Are you kidding me? You know what you just did? By taking Mr. Norton around to Trueblood's house and to the Golden Day and all of these things, what were you thinking of? If you do this again, or if something bad happens, then Mr. Norton might pull the funding for the school. And so because of that, you're being expelled from the college." And so this is interesting to Invisible Man, because he thought he was doing the right thing all along. He's recommitted himself to the college, and yet that opportunity has been pulled out from underneath him. So he goes to New York, and he gets a job in a in a paint factory, in the boiler room of a paint factory. And the paint company is called Liberty Paints, and they're known for their white paint. And the slogan is, if it's optic white, it's the right white. And this kind of copies a slogan of white supremacy, if it's white, it's right. And this philosophy, and this is where the Invisible Man is now working for Liberty Paints. One of the employees, a white employee in the boiler room, is Lucius Brockway, and he is paranoid because he thinks that the Invisible Man and other people like the Invisible Man are there to take his job away, and so he wants to make sure to protect his job. And so one day he tricks the Invisible Man into turning the wrong valve, and by doing so, blows up a boiler in the basement of Liberty Paints factory, which sends the Invisible Man to the hospital. He wakes up in the hospital thinking, and he hears doctors talking about him being a mental health patient. Why? Because who else would do this? Who else would purposely blow up a boiler? And they talk about maybe using electric shock to treat him. This is not something that Invisible Man wants. So he tries to go home. He's walking through the streets of Harlem, and he's still pretty weak from his injuries, and he faints. And the woman who's there to take care of him, to pick him up and to fix him up, is a woman named Mary, who is described as a mother figure. And again, we're thinking about symbolically and biblically. There could be something there about the name Mary of this woman. But he still has no job, and he's wandering the streets of New York. He observes things going on, and he sees an old couple getting evicted from their home, and he stops and he has people gather around, and he gives a speech about how wrong it is to send these people like this out into the street. And people get stirred up, and they won't let this happen. And suddenly there's a riot that occurs at that moment. One of the people that hears the speech and sees the riot is someone who's named his Brother Jack. Now, Brother Jack is a communist who recruits the Invisible Man to give speeches to help unite the Black community under communism. And there was another book that we read in this class. It's called Native Son by Richard Wright. And Wright was a Black communist as well. And so there is, in the 30s and 40s, this is before World War II, there is an effort by the communist community to reach out to the Black community as a way to try to find equality and civil rights. So Brother Jack is there, and he recruits the Invisible Man to try to unite the Black community under communism. And the Invisible Man likes this idea. He likes the idea of doing something important about making history. And he does such a good job. He's a smart guy and all that he's given authority to organize all of Harlem. Someone sees that he's doing this work, and he tells him that, that white people run the Brotherhood. Oh, by the way, the Brotherhood is what Brother Jack is a part of, this communist group. He says the whites run the Brotherhood, and no one really seems to care about, the plight of the Black community. So just think about that. But his name is all over town. He's becoming like a leader in the community, and a local magazine asks him to be interviewed. He doesn't want to be interviewed. He just wants to do the work. He doesn't really want to be the spokesperson, but they really want him. And so the article comes out, and the Brotherhood, again, which is run by whites, is upset with the Invisible Man because it seems like he's taking credit for the work of what the Brotherhood is doing. And so they don't like the fact that he is becoming the star and that he's getting too much power. And so the Brotherhood pulls him out of Harlem and says, you've been great there, but you're going to go somewhere else. And so they put him somewhere else in the city. There's another group going on in the city, the Black Nationalists. These are the groups who are trying to literally fight for civil rights and claim the equality that they deserve. And the Black Nationalists and the Brotherhood don't seem to get along very well. And so when in this new part of the in this new part of the city that the Invisible Man is in, when the Black Nationalists see him on this day, they tackle him and beat him up a little bit. And this is something that the Invisible Man doesn't like. And so this is when he dresses up in a disguise with hat and sunglasses. And this is the image that we get of what the Invisible Man is like. And so think about this, we're coming up to kind of the climax of the book, right? And every time he is not who he really wants to be, whether it be getting the scholarship or getting the job or now being a communist when he's really not a communist. All of those times when he's not really who he is, truly who he is, he seems to be rewarded. And the times when he wants to be himself, which is rare, he seems to get punished. And so he decides he's just gonna wear a disguise. But the problem is when he's wearing the disguise, he's mistaken for a lot of different people. He's mistaken for a man named Reinhardt, mistaken for someone's lover. He's mistaken for a hipster and a gambler and a briber and a reverend and all of these things. And he realizes that nobody is really seeing him for who he is. They're seeing him as other people. Reinhardt especially hits him because he realizes that whoever this Reinhardt is seems to have lost his own identity by conforming to white society, by conforming to what they want to hear, what white society wants to hear. And so by doing so, he's lost his own personal identity. And he realizes that his identity as a black person, or not really as a black person, as whatever his name is as an individual, his identity as an individual wasn't really that important to the Brotherhood. It was only the color of his skin that was important. And so he begins to kind of fight back a little bit. He remembers his grandfather's dying advice: overcome him with yeses, undermine him with grins, agree him to death and destruction. And so this is, this idea of make it seem like you're doing what they want and agree with them and be polite and all that. But when it comes down to it, do exactly what you think and work hard to get that. And so he decides to subvert the Brotherhood by telling the leaders of the Brotherhood how great things are going in Harlem, even though things are crumbling and falling apart, especially when he's not there to do his work. So things are falling apart in Harlem. And that they result in this big conflict, a race riot, basically, between the Brotherhood and the Black nationalists. And so there's this huge fight. And again, violence is an important part of this. The leader of the Black nationalists is a man named Ross, and I think that might have some symbolic meaning as well. He's in full tribal clothing, and he picks out the Invisible Man out of the crowd, and he orders him to be hanged for his role with the Brotherhood. And there's people who are trying to protect the Invisible Man and all this chaos. And finally, Ross throws a spear at him, and he moves, it falls on the ground, and the Invisible Man picks it up and throws it back, and it hits Ross in the cheek. And again, cheek is important too, about, turning the other cheek and all of that kind of stuff. And there's also like some references to being a false prophet. And maybe Ross is that. He defined himself as or not himself, but other people see him now as a false prophet, as someone who pretended to be someone who had the truth, but he really doesn't. And after this whole melee is going on, the Invisible Man realizes that maybe he is the one that has helped cause the rioting. And then in so doing, he's brought sympathy to the white controlled Brotherhood, who were simply using him for his blackness. And so this is kind of, so again, like when he tries to do good, things don't seem to work out. And when he tries to do nothing, even things get crazy. But he can't handle like all of this conflicts and complexity and all that. So he tries to run away. A group of men accost him, grab him. He's still, by the way, carrying the briefcase that he was given by that organization early on in the book. They want the briefcase. He won't give it back. They punch him and beat him up a little bit. He keeps running away, and this is when he falls down in this manhole. And his pursuers like look down into the manhole, and they ridicule him, and they taunt him, and they finally leave though. But the Invisible Man doesn't. He makes a little home in this hole, and he taps into the electrical lines, and he puts up 1,369 bulbs in the hole. And this is where the story ends. It ends where it starts, in that hole in the ground with 1,369 bulbs and him in it. And I meant to read you the epilogue of the book, but the book is at the Lakeview High School Library and not here at my house. So if you want to read the epilogue, you can. It's fantastic. It's just a short little thing where he kind of wraps up what the purpose is, and it's almost as if he's willing to leave his hole to go out and try to be exactly who he is, and try to make the world a better place any way that he can. So some things that you can think about here, things like why is it a good thing that he doesn't have a name? And if you've ever seen a movie or read a book without someone, with a character without a name, there's usually a purpose for that. It's usually that then the traits of the character can be applied to anyone. Therefore, by putting a name on him would be detrimental. What is the significance of a fight or the use of violence? That's an important question. I'm going to see if I can look up the last sentence in Invisible Man, because it's so good. I kind of want to get it right. Yes, so I have it here. I'll read you the last sentence at the end here. Let's see what else I can ask you here. Think about. Really, we want to talk to you about the role of identity and conformity and all that. And here's this second bullet point is a good section of the book. Whence all this passion toward conformity anyway? Diversity is the word. Let man keep his many parts, and you'll have no tyrant states. Why, if they follow conformity business, they'll end up by forcing me, an invisible man, to become white, which is not a color, but the lack of one. America is woven of many strands. I would recognize them and let it so remain. So there is this conflict of, is there an American identity, or is America's identity in and of itself about being different from each other? And this concept of the invisible man, right? There are two steps for being invisible. There's being able to and being willing to show yourself who you are. And so the Invisible Man had trouble with that, showing who he really was. And then there's the other side, is, are you really working hard to see who the other person really is, or are you just looking right through them? This has a lot of implications in your own lives, right? And how you see other people. Do you really see people? Or do you just look through them to see what you want to see? And vice versa, are you showing the world who you really are? Or are you simply trying to make it look like you fit in with everybody else? Anyway, so I want to tell you the last line of the book, which I think is very powerful. I'm going to read it a couple times. Because the Invisible Man has no name, and because I told you the point of that might be so that what happened to him could be applied to anyone. The last line of the book is this: who knows but that on the lower frequencies, I speak for you. Who knows but on the lower frequencies, I speak for you. And so could it be that the Invisible Man really is not telling the story about himself, but telling the story about you, or telling the story about me, or telling the story about everyone? And I think that opens up the book to be applied and be used by anyone who reads it. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Other than that, I'll see you next time. Thanks.